Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Well, it's been a while since I've done any kind of sewing project video, so I thought now's the time to do it. I've actually been planning to do this for a while. Now, by the way, and before I get started, this is actually a treadle machine. It was bought that way. Was never an electric machine. It's not set up to be an electric. So yes, you can buy brand new treadle machines. This is the Genome 712T, I believe. I just did a video update on this machine since I've had it for 9 years and been using it. Longest running machine I've ever had, and I love it. So I'll give you that. I'll link you down to the update video that I did. And I also have a video that goes back about 5-6 years that I did on how to use a treadle machine. And so I'll link to that one down below as well. And also the whole sewing playlist if you're interested in more simple projects or how to change out the belt and all that kind of stuff. So today what we're going to be doing is making a gift bag out of an old pillowcase. Now, you've got a couple of options when you're talking about an old pillowcase, is that it's all going to depend on the size that you need. You can use the whole entire pillowcase if you need it to be for a larger item, or if you're wanting a more standard size gift bag, then you can cut the pillowcase into quarters. But how you deal with each quarter is going to vary, because you might want to put this casing into play, which is what I'm going to do today. Now, I don't want a huge gift bag in this case. I just want to make some standard size ones that I can put just about anything in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by cutting this into quarters, and I'm going to cut it evenly, but because of the casing, half the bags are going to be bigger than the other half. So let me go ahead and do this. I'm going to rip it down this way lengthwise first, and I'm literally going to rip it. So this is 100% cotton, so it will rip into a straight line simply enough. You might need to do a little snip when you get down to the seam. Then I'm going to fold that each half in half and then cut it along that line. So it's good to fold it first so you can have a straight line to work with or to cut on. And again, because it's 100% cotton, it'll rip straight no matter if you go horizontally or vertically. Okay, so there's the makings for the first bag. Now in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using the casing that's already in place. So I'm going to leave it there, but I still have to deconstruct it a little bit in order to put in the hole for the tie I'm going to put in the bag. Now, if you're using the bottom half where you don't have a casing, you'll already have a seam, the bottom seam in place, so you won't have to do that, but you will have to make the casing on the top, which means at that point you're going to make sure that you want to do this after you stitch your sides together. So I've already got 2 sides stitched because of the way this is, so all I need to do is stitch down this way. So I'm going to go ahead and make that other side seam. I really want to open these curtains up all the way, but we actually have a really sunny day today, and I don't want the sun shining right on here. It might be too bright. You might not be able to see what I'm doing. Always doubling the stitching over where I start and where I end. And so at that point, then what I like to do when I'm doing anything like this is I had to obviously right sides together to do the seam, and then turn it right side out to do the casing. I find it a little easier to do it that way. So what I always do first, and I'm not going to sew all this right now, is I'll fold down the hem first, and then I'll stitch that with a real loose stitch, and then I will fold it over to the length I want, to the width I want. And that's going to depend on if you want to ruffle at the top or not. And I'll get to that when I do the other one. But I just want to get an idea first, and I want to find the center. So let's say I've already got that stitch put down, and then I'm going to fold it over. Let's say I want it about that wide, and I want just a little bit there for a ruffle at the top, but I'm not going to do all that yet. Once I've got that figured out, I'm going to fold this back in half. I'm going to put a little mark right here because that's where I want my hole to be. And then I'm going to do a tight stitch all the way around, then make my hole. And then I will fold this down over that hole and then do the stitching across to hold that down. And then if I'm wanting a little ruffle at the top, a stitch here. You just want to make sure that you account for the size of whatever you're going to be threading through there. And you'll see more as I do this other bag. I just wanted to show you that real quick. But since I'm going to be working with the casing that's already in place on this bag, I, at this point, am not going to stitch this down yet. I'm going to leave this open because what I've got to do is figure out each one of these are going to be the side, and I need to find the center of one of these two sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it inside out, put right sides together, and now I'm going to figure out where the halfway point is, and I'm going to put a little mark on the inside. You can use chalk, you can use a pen, just right on the edge so I'll know what to look for. Because this is a little different than I normally do this. Normally I do it more like I described, where I get it all put together and then do the casing. But since this casing is already in place, but I need to open it up because I have to put that little buttonhole in there. This is why I'm doing it this way. And I don't want to open up the whole entire casing. There's no need to. I just need to open it up enough that I can work with it. So I'm opening it up where I put that mark. And if you want to, you can take that whole casing out. The nice thing is it's already folded over and it's going to hold for you when you go to do whatever it is you're doing. So I can see where the stitching was, when I sew it back down, where the stitching is going to be. I see my little mark right here, which you probably won't be able to see because it's blending in with the fabric, but I can see it. And then at this halfway point between, I'm going to fold this back down. Let's say this is on the inside, but I'm folding this down so you can see better. Between where this is going to be stitched down and between where I'm going to want my ruffle, which I'm going to say is going to be about right here, that's where I want to put my hole. So at that point, I'm going to fold that back. That's going to mark right where I'm going to put the hole. And then using that other mark, that more vertical mark, see there, now that's where I'm going to have the hole to thread my lacing through. And your lacing could be something as simple as a nice shoelace if you want. But I'll show you in a minute what I'm going to use. And though this machine does have the buttonhole option, I never actually use it. I just use my own stitching. I always have it set on zigzag almost all the time anyway. And I'm going to put this down to, you can go from 1 to 0 on the setting. And I usually for this, I'll do 1. And if I feel like I need to go over it again, I'll go over it. But this is just a gift bag. The chances of it being open and closed a lot are slim. So I don't need to make this too heavy duty. And I'm using a light blue thread because there's a little bit of light blue in here. And I thought that would kind of bring that out because this is going to show. And so I'm just going to stitch along there, a nice tight stitch. And if it tries to get hung up a little bit there, just pull it through. Sometimes when you're doing that, it will kind of get stuck in place and then the stitch will get taller and taller and then it won't move. That's what happened there. So sometimes you got to sort of work around that. And then here, I usually do really more like a buttonhole. This is how I do for the lacing for the patchwork skirts that I make, or skirts, because they're not all patchwork. I do the same idea, except in that case, I always put a divider down the center. I'm not sure that I'm going to do that here. I might, since I did make this wider than I had intended. And the reason I put that divider is that when you go to wash the skirt, you know, if this is something you're going to throw in the wash, that's going to decrease the chance of the lacing pulling out. But there's other things that you can do, like stitching it down in the back with a more hidden type stitch that would prevent that from happening. So you want that done before you close up your casing. And in this case, I decided to get it done before I hem everything down, since that way I can open it up now nice and wide. Now I'm not going to stitch this down right now, because the first thing I want to do before I stitch all this down is to sew my sides together, since I got to stitch this down anyway. And that's going to apply no matter whether you're using the casing that's in place or not. Now, you might want to take all this threading out, But again, the good thing about the casing already being here is it's already ironed down. It's already, you don't have to do anything to it. So if you're not liking this thread or the color of it, because you're going to, like me, be using a different color thread, then usually you can just grab, once you've got it cut, usually you can just grab the thread, one of the threads, and pull it. Sometimes it will slip right out and then make it easy, but that's not wanting to do that. So I'm just going to rip the rest of this out, and then you'll want to pull all your threads, especially anything that's on the outside, off of there. But again, I don't have to do that stitching across to hold it. The basting stitch is what that would be. So now I'm going to put right sides together, and I'm still using a zigzag stitch just because I just need to loosen it up. It doesn't need to be that tight, just because I like the zigzag. It has a nice hold. And yes, you can actually sew quite fast on a treadle machine. Honestly, I was very surprised. And I always, by the way, do a reverse when I get to the corner. Any end, I always do the reverse at the beginning and at the end. I'll go over it a couple times as you saw me do this. What this cap here is. It is a little trickier when you're doing a treadle, because you got to have your hand to spin the wheel. You got to be able to press the button down and hold. But hey, you find your rhythm, you make it work. So there we go. The bag is actually sewn together. And now all I need to do then is turn it right side out again. Make sure I turn my corners. Okay, then the next thing you want to do before you close up the casing is you want to go ahead, open that up, because this is going to prevent you from ripping the fabric on the other side, and then make your hole in there. I like to use a seam ripper to do that rather than scissors, because it's just a little easier. You can just poke the seam ripper through. Then at that point, if you want, you can take the scissors and just snip it like this to make the hole a little bit better. You've got that nice satin stitch going around there, so that's going to keep it from unraveling. Now that I got that done, I got it turned right side out again. Now I'm going to go through, and I got the hole punched in there, and put that stitching all the way around. It's having a hard time getting started because there's a lot of fabric there. Okay. And again, I want to do that reverse stitch. Sometimes I simply, instead of holding the reverse button down, I will just hold the fabric in place and keep it from pulling through. It depends on what I'm doing, especially if I don't have enough hands to do both. Just follow that around. This is super easy. I didn't have to iron it or anything. Okay, use that reverse, lock it in place. Okay, so there's that. Now, you can leave it like that, but for like this little tiny gift bag I made here for my daughter-in-law, just because I had something real small I was gonna give her, and I wanted something cute and nice, so I made her this little tiny gift bag. I didn't think to put a ruffle at the top because I was in a hurry. But in this case, I do recommend it, because if you want it to give it just a prettier look, I say make sure that you know right where that buttonhole is. And you might even want to do this from the right side of the fabric, like this. And you can even stitch right across the top of that buttonhole, and then all the way around. And then make sure you figure out what you want to line this up to. You can put a mark on here. You can use like even a permanent marker. If you use a permanent marker, you can simply use rubbing alcohol to get it off if you don't want it to stay. But I'm using basically this dot, and then there's also lines here you can follow. Just depends on how wide it is. Most of the time I don't really follow a line. I just go by sight. And then just stitch all the way around, making sure that your fabric there on the back side is not getting hung up, and your underneath it is not coming underneath it, because you don't want to stitch that down. You'd have to rip it out because you wouldn't be able to open the bag. You just want to make sure that when you do this, you make this casing that it's got to be wide enough to fit whatever it is you're going to lace through there. So that's really important. And so that works out pretty good, because that gave me even extra hold at the top of that hole. And look what I did. Just what I was saying right there. And I might as well leave this in the video so you can see what exactly the thing I was telling you not to do, I just did. So what that means is rip that out, and now I got to go back, stitch that part down again. So I'm going to do this from the inside this time. So it's better if you can prevent having to do that, having to add that extra stitch. So you got to be paying attention, which is easy not to do when you're trying to shoot a video and talk and explain everything at the same time. Okay, the bag is made. So all I got to do next is I got to thread my tie through there. So what I did here is I just did a hand crocheted tie that I used 2 strands of yarn. It's a similar idea that I used to make my hair ties, except for in this case I only used 2 strands, where for the hair ties I always use 3. These are the same kind of ties I make also to go on the skirt. So I have a video on how to do this if you already know how to crochet, and even if you don't, this is one of the first projects you can learn how to do, because a chain stitch is all it is, and that's the very first stitch you learn. So I have a video on how to get started in crocheting, including obviously starting with the chain stitch, and then I also have a video showing how I make the hair ties, so following the same thing except for just using 2 strands of yarn. And then I always keep diaper pins handy, because to me they're the perfect thing for threading anything through a casing, depending of course on the size of the casing. They won't, you know, if it's a small little casing, you'll need a smaller safety pin. Another mistake I'm leaving in here so you can see what happened is I forgot, when I went to stitch that down, when I folded the sides over to sew them together, I forgot I needed to unfold the casing as well. It's okay if this is in, if this is folded in, that small little hem, but you can't have the casing down, or you're going to make it so you cannot get your lacing through there. So now I got to rip that out, stitch that down. I could rip out more and make this sew a little faster, but I'm trying to avoid doing that. So I got to work real carefully here to not stitch in any wrinkles. But yeah, you got to rip out enough that you can work with it too. Okay, now I can fold this over and stitch this back down. Now I'll have a hole that goes all the way through. But unfortunately, now I got to do this stitching here in 2 places, because I had to rip out all that. So I actually had to restitch 3 different places. The sides together, the original stitch for the casing, and then the stitch that's going up here to make that little ruffle at the top. And if you don't understand what I mean by the ruffle at the top, you'll see once I get the lacing in place. Okay, there we go. Now this should work. I shouldn't have any problem getting this through now. So anyway, you just push your safety pin or whatever it is you're using to thread with. You just got to be careful how you grab them, because if you grab them a certain way, if you're having a hard time, they'll come undone in there, and then you got to pull it back out, close it back up, and do it again. Diaper pins are the best if your casing is big enough for that. Okay, and then just even it up. And then if it really matters and this is not going to come out because it's snug enough, I'll have knots here at the end. But just to make sure, if you're doing anything like this, be it a skirt, a pair of sweatpants or whatever, you can always add a little straight stitch right here. That will keep your lacing from coming out of the casing while it's in the wash. That's one way. Usually knots will prevent that for the most part, depending on the sizes of the knots. And then again, you can get, you can find all kinds of fancy shoelaces if you don't crochet, or even a ribbon. You can just take a ribbon and put it in there. And a lot of your ribbon, like your grosgrain, your satin ribbons, well, apparently I don't have any ribbon handy. All you need to do is take a lighter and just melt the very edges after you cut it, and that will prevent it from fraying. That's what we used to do for point shoes. So we put ribbons on our point shoes, and then you just kind of melt the edges a little bit. They won't fray. Just take a lighter and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and add, I got the tassels in place. I'm just going to go ahead and add an extra knot over the top. This is another step that I always take when I'm making these things. I think it makes it look nicer too, more complete. And so when you pull that, cinch that up, it's kind of got a little ruffle rather than just being straight across right here. And then whatever you put in there, you tie your little bow, and you got a nice little gift bag. Oh, and by the way, never mind my piles of fabric over here. This is another skirt I got to put together starting today. And I got more skirts piled up over here. I got some some of Patrick's jeans I need to him. But anyway, if you wanted to, let's say you got a bottle of your own homemade wine you wanted to gift to someone, make this bag just a little taller and a little thinner, and you got a beautiful bag for putting that in, or make it any size you want. Use the whole entire pillowcase for a bigger gift, and it's really simple, especially if it's when it is you're using the whole entire pillowcase. Like I said, I wouldn't use this simply because if I was going to do that casing, all the printing would be upside down both on this and on the body. But you already got this nice casing in place. You don't have to do anything else but open up one place to be able to work your little buttonhole in there and put your tie. Or you could even, here's another idea too, if you didn't want to go with that, you could have the tie being on the outside, even just under the casing like this, just sew in a couple of loops, like belt loops, that you could run the drawstring through, and it would be on the outside, so it would show more anyway. You'd get to see more of it, and that would be an even more simple way to do that. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something new, and especially with the holidays coming up, some people like to give gifts. This might give you some ideas you can get started on right now for putting your gifts in. And here's the great thing. You can reuse that again and again and again. So that person gets it. If they don't want to keep it to use it for something for themselves, they can gift something in it. If they have to wash it, they can just wash it and use it again. No big deal. It's not only a great way to upcycle some old fabrics, but you're making some gift bags that can have many other purposes or get used many times over instead of just thrown in the trash. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.